Okay, hi everyone. My name is Anja Jamrozik, and I'm here representing the Well Living Lab. Today my goals in this talk are first to introduce you to the Well Living Lab and the new facility we have to test the effect of the built environment on people. And second, to share with you our first study, which we recently wrapped up, which looks at the effect of acoustic, lighting, and thermal conditions on office workers with the ultimate aim of informing how to best design productive and healthy offices. To give you some background, the Well Living Lab is a collaboration between Delos and Mayo Clinic. Delos is a health and wellness real estate company, and it is also the pioneer of the Well Building Standard, which is the first building standard focused exclusively on health and wellness. Mayo Clinic is a hospital, research, and teaching institution, and it is consistently ranked #1 in more medical specialties than any other hospital. So into this equation, Delos brings the building science, and Mayo Clinic brings the health science, and together both have a human-centered approach to understanding how the built environment impacts people. The leadership of the lab reflects both sides of the partnership and this diverse expertise. And we have a team of domain experts who bring knowledge from building, health, and behavioral science. And I'd just like to point out my colleague Carolina is here today as well, so if you have questions about the Well Living Lab, they're both available to talk. The goal of the lab is to conduct actionable research in order to improve the built environment. And the way we do this is we simulate the real-world conditions in the lab. We have people in there, and then we test the effect of this environment on human participants. We have collaborators both inside the lab and outside the lab with a range of expertise, so this is a very collaborative environment, and everyone is working together to produce data that can then inform building design. The lab is located in Rochester, Minnesota, adjacent to the Mayo Clinic. And we have a virtual tour up on YouTube if you're interested in learning about the features of the space. But just as a brief overview, the lab is made up of 6 separate modules that are completely reconfigurable. So we can change the ceilings, we can change the floors, we can change the walls, we can change everything inside the space. And currently, we have 3 of these modules set up as an open office configuration, which was the site of our first study. We also have 1 module set up as a residential unit and 2 modules in the planning stage. In the back of the house, we have a control center where we control all of the environmental factors within these experimental modules and also monitor the sensors that are in the space. So here's an overview of what we can control in the experimental modules and the sensors we have. All the things in italics are being planned right now, and we're constantly adding more sensors. So the environment in the experimental modules is very sensor rich. So we're gathering as much data as we can, both about the environmental conditions, but also about the participants in the lab themselves. So this first study was a proof of concept that we could manipulate environmental variables and then see their effects on human participants. So the lab only opened last year, so we recently completed this study. And the focus was on acoustic, lighting, and thermal conditions. And I'll go through that. The reason we chose these 3 factors is because prior research shows that they're important for occupants of a building. So there's research showing that environmental noise, like for example being next to a busy street or being under a flight path, as well as office noise, so hearing office machines or hearing your coworkers talking can impact the occupants of the building. So in this study, we focused on 2 aspects of noise. We manipulated whether or not there was white noise in the space and whether or not there was simulated speech. So we wanted to take a look at both of these. In terms of lighting, there's prior work showing that both daylight availability through windows and also aspects of the electrical lighting, such as color temperature, are important to occupants of a space. So in this study, we also investigated both of these. We manipulated whether or not daylight was coming into the space through the use of blinds and through the use of electrochromic tinting on the windows. And we also manipulated the color temperature of electrical lighting in the space. Finally, there's researched that thermal conditions are very important to occupants. So the environmental factors that have been manipulated include temperature, humidity, airflow, and there's also individual factors at play. So what kind of clothing are people wearing in the space? So in the study, we manipulated temperature, and we also were interested in seeing how people adapt to the space, what kind of adjustments they were making with their clothing and so on. So the way this worked is we set up 6 scenes with a combination of these factors. The first scene at the top is the baseline condition, which is kind of a typical office. So the lights are a kind of yellowy color, and I'll show you in a second. The electrochromic tint is clear, so there's windows in the space that you can see out of. The shades are controllable by the participants. The temperature was 71 degrees, and there was no audio added to the space. So this is our baseline that we'll be comparing all the other 5 conditions against. So these conditions are made up of a variety of factors. For example, scene 3 and 5 have closed windows. The rest have open windows. The temperature varies across the scenes, and the kind of noise varies. I think the temperature and the speech and the shades are easy to understand, but just to give you an idea of what these color temperatures represent. So the baseline scene was here, so a sort of yellowy light typical of offices. Scenes 3 and 4 had a more orangey light. Scene 2 had a white light, and scenes 5 and 6 had a blue enhanced light. So during the course of the study, people were in the lab for 18 weeks, and we presented each scene for 1 week and repeated it multiple times throughout the study. So each of those scenes that you saw were presented at least for 2 weeks during the study. The participants in the space, there were 8 medical records workers who came into the space, and they just completed their regular work tasks. So they were just working in the space. And they were wearing some wearables, but besides that, nothing else happened throughout the day. And then at the end of the day, we asked them to complete surveys. And we also completed interviews at certain points during the study as well. So just to give you an idea, I'm talking about surveys today, so this is just this part of the study, but we also collected a ton of environmental variables and wearable variables that we're continuing to analyze, so we'll have a better picture of what was going on soon. In terms of the daily surveys, we asked people about variables related to their work, as well as satisfaction with the 3 factors that we manipulated. So for work variables, we asked them how alert they were feeling when they were leaving work, to what degree the work environment made it easy for them to get their work done, whether they were overwhelmed with their work, and the ease of interactions at work. For satisfaction, we asked about noise, lighting, and temperature, and then we had this open-ended question, which ended up being very informative. What, if anything, did you do to counteract or take advantage of the effects of your environment? And we actually got a lot of comments about how people were actually reacting to the space there. So in terms of alertness, this was rated on a 1 to 5 scale. And the way that we analyzed the data was with linear mixed models, where we had scene as a fixed effect, and we also had the random effect of participants. So we were modeling how each person was responding to the space overall and how they were responding to each scene. So what I'm showing you here are the model estimates of each of the scenes. So we were comparing baseline against the other scenes. Orange, just for reference, means an effect is marginal, red is going to be significant. So we observed a marginal effect for scene 3, where people were reporting that they were less alert when leaving the space. And this scene will come out again and again. This is not a scene that people liked. So here the light was orangey, the shades were closed, it was cold, and there was noise. So you'll see again and again that this is not good. In terms of asking people to what degree the work environment made it easy for them to get their work done, here we again observed that scene 3 was considerably lower, and scenes 4 and 5 were marginally lower. And these scenes aren't that similar to each other. So scenes 3 and 5 both had closed shades, but scene 4 had open shades and it was warm, as opposed to the other scenes being cold. So as we are beginning to see, different kinds of uncomfortable environments can affect people, leading to a similar outcome in that it doesn't help them get their work done. And we can really see this in the kind of comments that people left. So in scene 3, when people were asked how they were responding to the environment, they said that their concentration was bad, it was hard to work, it was hard to focus, they couldn't work efficiently, and their productivity was down. So they were noticing these changes in their work themselves. The other two work variables, whether they were overwhelmed with work and their ease of interactions, did not vary by scene. So I think this is beginning to suggest that certain aspects of the environment can affect some work variables, but others are not as sensitive to the environment. Next, let's look at satisfaction. So first we asked people about satisfaction with noise. And here we found of 3 of the 4 conditions where we added noise into the space, their degree of satisfaction was lower. And I'd just like to point out that in conditions 4 and 6, these were numerically the lowest, and these were also the ones with simulated speech being put into the space. And when we look at the comments that people left, the overwhelming themes that came out were that the noise was very distracting. They had to actively work to ignore the noise, and many comments talk specifically about the speech or the talking or the chatter in the space, so they were really picking it up. For lighting, we saw that people were less satisfied in conditions 3 and 5, where the shades were closed, so they didn't have access to a view outside. And this is just a slide from a colleague who had an luminance sensor on desks, and what you can see is the scenes that are circled are scenes 3 and 5, and the level of luminance inside was actually a lot lower on those in those weeks, so we can actually observe it in the environment as well. And the comments that people left were really about feeling confined in the space without having the view, and some comments about how it was affecting their mood as well. In terms of temperature, I'm showing you the intended temperature in the space here and the actual temperature from sensors here. So we weren't able to perfectly get the conditions that we were hoping for. But what we found here was that basically anytime it went below 71 degrees, satisfaction decreased. So the colder it was, the less satisfied they were. Yep?
Is there much variation seasonally from like summer and winter?
This was from June through September. So it didn't, there were some weeks where I think, you were trying to get to 67 and you weren't quite getting there because it was very hot outside. So yes, there is some variability there. Yep?
Were the participants allowed to use earphones or headphones?
Yes. And definitely comments came out that when we put in noise into the space, people were adjusting by putting in headphones or trying to, put anything to block out the noise. So this was very realistic of, I think, what would happen in a normal office setting. For temperature, we're really seeing the effects of people trying to adjust to their environment. So they were putting on blankets, they were putting on clothes, they were taking walks, and some people tried to put images of hot environments to make themselves feel warmer, which some of these were more effective than others. In terms of weekly surveys, we asked, again, about work environment. We asked whether there was anything about the lighting, acoustic, temperature conditions that caused you to notice it and whether it affected your work. And what we found was extremely similar to what I just showed you, so I'm not going to go through it, where basically the conditions where people were less satisfied at a daily level were also the ones that they were unsatisfied with at a weekly level. In terms of asking whether people were satisfied with the amount or kind of work they did during that week, we did not observe an effective scene. So again, this might be a factor that's just too broad to be as sensitive to the environment, at least in our sample size. Next, we asked about more general feelings that they had, so trying to capture how the environment was impacting them. So we asked about distraction, energy, effort, and happiness. And we also asked about health outside the lab, so something that might be affected with the amount of exercise or how well they were sleeping. So we wanted to get a broader picture of how this was affecting them. In terms of distraction, we found a marginal effect for scene 5, where people were reporting that they were more distracted. But beyond that, we didn't observe anything else. In terms of effort, how much effort they felt they were putting forth, again, scenes 3 and 5 keep coming up as environments where people really had to work against them in order to be able to do their work. So they were showing more effort here. And this was affecting their mood as well. So in scene 3, people were reporting that they were less happy overall, which suggests that even on the broad scale of a week, the work environment that they were experiencing was overall impacting how they were feeling. And then the final variable in terms of sluggish or energetic, we didn't pick that up here. So we did pick it up at a daily level, but it didn't seem to come out at the weekly level. So next, let's look at exercise. So here we didn't really observe anything by scene. So we asked people the level of exercise they were doing, none, less than their usual amount, usual or more, and it didn't seem to vary. So the kind of conditions that they were getting at work didn't seem to impact how much they wanted to move outside of work. Our other health variable was in trouble sleeping. And here, interestingly, we found that people reported less trouble sleeping in conditions 5 and 6. And these are the conditions with the blue enhanced high temperature light. And we think this is really interesting because these are the light temperatures that are implicated in circadian rhythm. So in our upcoming study, we're going to focus specifically on light and seeing how that can impact people's productivity, performance, and life outside the lab. So just to recap, we did find differences in terms of work variables, some more general feelings, and some aspects of health outside of the lab. So to conclude, what we wanted to test with this first study was whether we could measure the impact of lighting, acoustic, temperature conditions on occupants. Yes, we can, which is great because now we can go do more subtle and more forward-thinking studies as well. And the environmental conditions that we found affected people were, or how did the environmental conditions affect people? We found an impact on work, on their level of distraction and effort, on their satisfaction with these factors, on their mood, on their sleep and alertness. And then other variables were not affected. So the satisfaction with how much or the kind of work they did, how overwhelmed they felt at work, their social interactions and exercise. So again, certain outcome variables may be more affected by the environment than others. And again, we had a small sample size, so we might not be able to observe more subtle differences here. We have several studies in the works. So as I mentioned, in our next study, we really want to focus on lighting. And so we're developing a broad test of cognitive function that we want to give to people in different lighting conditions and seeing how the lighting conditions affect cognitive function, how they affect their productivity, and then how they affect their life outside of the lab. And so we're planning that early next year. And we also want to get residential studies going. So we have a residential pilot in about a week where I'm actually going to be living in the residential unit as subject 1. So we want to make sure that the unit is usable for people, that we have everything that they need so that we can start doing full-scale residential work. We have a big alliance of collaborators, so both companies, but also organizations, academic institutions that we are very open to collaborating with. And these are some of our original alliance members, but we're very interested in collaboration. So if you are interested, please talk to me or Carolina or email us because we really want to integrate as much expertise from different fields as we can. The lab recently got featured in an Nature article, so if you want to have more specifics about the lab, that's available. And if you have any questions, feel free to talk to me or Carolina. Thank you.
Yep. So I thought it was very interesting that despite people reporting that they were uncomfortable, etc., in the lab, that they didn't report that it affected their work